In the year 2265, Lieutenant Hikaru Sulu will join the fleet of the Starship Enterprise. His mission?
To explore strange new worlds, to
seek out new life and new civilizations, to boldly go where no one has gone before.
The Enterprise is employed by the United Federation of Planets, a governing body made up of diverse creeds, genders, races, and species, all working together towards a new age of exploration. The Starship Enterprise is politically devoid of the prejudices faced by its actors. The Cold War is a far-flung memory, as Captain Kirk and Chekhov work together in absolute trust. And in the same respect, Hikaru Sulu's peers do not see a Pan-Asian man and question his fealty or loyalty to the mission. His success and merit are based on his dedication and incredible competence. He belongs there. There's no question of this. In 1965, George Takei, a Los Angeles-born man, was cast in the then unknown series Star Trek. Gene Roddenberry, the show's creator, cast George Takei with the promise that his character would not simply be a tokenization, that Sulu would act as a valued representation of people that looked like George, and that the Starship Enterprise would be a metaphor for Starship Earth. And the strength of that starship came from its diversity, coming together and working in concert as a team. At the time of his casting, racial discrimination was far from fiction. In 1964, the civil rights movement was in full swing, and racial segregation was an all too recent memory. This made the world of Star Trek seem outlandish, but not impossible. The future depicted on screen was one of hope. It was aspirational. Race, gender, and species working united towards the pursuit of discovery. Star Trek has always been a pioneer for diversity, with modern seasons offering depictions of inclusivity as a standard, along with representations for new groups deserving of validation. And as much as we can appreciate the impact the series has had on us, it's difficult to overstate the effect it had at the time of its inception, and what it meant for a man like George Takei. In 1937, George Takei was born in Los Angeles, an American citizen of Japanese descent. He was the eldest of three, and unfortunately for him, he was born to a changing world. His father, Takekuma Norman Takei, named him George after the king. In 1939, the Second World War was declared. The Allied forces of England, the Soviet Union, and France, among others, fought in opposition to the Axis powers, Germany, Italy, and Japan. The United States remained impartial to the war, until in December of 1941, Japanese fighters made a surprise attack on Pearl Harbor. Unbeknownst to the 4-year-old George Takei, he joined an exclusive subset of citizens whose heritage and nationality were at war with each other. The theater of war was far from the shores of Los Angeles, but the Takei family did feel its effects. Public opinion of Japanese Americans shifted, and in an era when racial prejudice went unchecked, it was inevitable that George and his family would be branded as the other. Public officials viewed their family as a threat. Politicians and the public called for action, protecting honest Americans from the threats within the homeland. In 1942, when George was 5 years old, President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066 into effect. It reads, "Now, therefore, by virtue of the authority vested in me as President of the United States and Commander-in-Chief of the Army and Navy, I hereby authorize and direct the Secretary of War and the military commanders whom he may from time to time designate, whenever he or any designated commander deems such action necessary or desirable, to prescribe military areas in such places and of such extent that he or the appropriate military commander may determine, from which any or all persons may be excluded, and with respect to which the right of any person to enter, remain in, or leave shall be subject to whatever restrictions the Secretary of War or the appropriate military commander may impose in his discretion." But what does that mean? Well, it means that the military now had the power to displace people from their homes, to create militarized areas and move the people they see fit there regardless of their consent. And this is what happened. 122,000 individuals, men, women and children, were rounded up by armed guards from their homes and placed in internment camps. This was based solely on their ethnicity. They were deemed the Japanese threat. And this is the story George Takei tells in his 2019 graphic novel, They Called Us Enemy. The name is in reference to further classification in Executive Order 9066, which deemed any Japanese adult man as an enemy alien. The tragic irony of the man who would be Sulu being branded with this moniker is not lost on me. Young George Takei was born into a strange new world, one in which his leaders had dictated that he did not belong. The book narratively jumps between George's childhood as a prisoner in Arkansas and the experiences as an adult centered around his internment. We read the story of the laborious train ride, its windows blinded to the public, lest they see the prisoners inside. We see the community that was built within the camps and the infighting that occurred when the Japanese Americans were asked to denounce their heritage. All of them told through the eyes of a child who couldn't know any better. It's been 6 years since the publication of They Called Us Enemy. My local comic book store did not have a copy. I had to source this one online. So why write about it? Why bring it up? Why did I jot down 2,000 words and record and edit this? In June of 2025, They Called Us Enemy was banned in Tennessee school libraries. It's not the first time it's been banned, nor will it be the last. Tennessee has a pretty long list of banned books. I say long. There's 1,100 of them. Including, but not limited to, books about LGBT romance, books about the unfairness and horrors of war, and books about racial injustice and the corruption of state-sanctioned authority figures. The decision to ban the story of men with guns rounding up people based on their ethnicity in the land of the free is painfully curious. Why is this piece of history worth burying? Worth shielding from developing minds? I would like to say it's because Tennessee exists in a country and a world so far removed from the ugliness that it need not be dwelled upon. But on July 3rd, 2025, the first detainees were booked into the South Florida Detention Center, colloquially referred to as Alligator Alcatraz. Built to house overflow from the over 50,000 people held in immigration detention centers, $218 million invested to build this. It's projected to hold up to 5,000 detainees, with the President of the United States celebrating its use of alligators as a deterrent for escape. And with a force of masked armed men, detaining seemingly on a whim, it may not be long before it is filled. The facility, if you would care to be so neutral about it, was met with disdain when revealed to the public. Well, not just disdain. Like the Americans of 1941, there is, unfortunately, support being offered to the widespread incarceration. At the time of writing, there's a wide selection of merchandise celebrating the prison, and of the people that send them there. FDR made the decision to enact Executive Order 9066. Donald Trump built his campaign on walls and prison systems. But it's people that cheered. George Takei was a child during his time of internment. At the time, this seemed normal to him. Children are adaptable, he says, and his days were still filled with mischief and the company of other children. Innocence, for him, did not die behind barbed wire. He was too young to understand the complexities that dictated his life. But he could see it, the damage it did. His father aimed to make life better as much as he could for the people imprisoned there, and to provide whatever joy he could for his children. In 2014, George Takei held a TED Talk titled "Why I Love a Country That Once Betrayed Me," in which he details the trauma done to him and his family, along with remediations made by the American government, given too late for some to see. But he doesn't carry resentment. In a conversation with his father, they discuss their shared history and how it reflects the country they call home.
He told me that our democracy is a people's democracy, and it can be as great as the people can be, but it is also as fallible as people are.
There's an understanding that their incarceration is not meant to be a reason for embitterment. But I think of the moment in the graphic novel in which George and Takekuma are offered the opportunity to meet Eleanor Roosevelt. George sees the moment with honor, healing, and growth. His father feigned illness and refused to meet her. He was unable to face the wife of the man who imprisoned him and his family. These anecdotes of George and his father are the moments I remember the most. In one exchange, George flies off the handle, disgraced that his father and his fellow prisoners would not fight back against their oppression. The vitriol of scorned youth is met with quiet understanding, rationale, and hurt. When Takekuma boarded the long train to Arkansas, he left behind comfort, a home, and a career. On his exit, he had none of these things. In the midst of their internment, the US military reduced 2 Japanese cities to cinders. A thing that once was now gone. This was the plight of Takekuma Norman Takei. As he walked his family through Skid Row, his life was reduced to fragments by his own home. But the resentment did not become him. And this is what George Takei's memoir is about. Not begrudgment, just acknowledgement of his country's failings and a certainty that it can do better. The latter chapters detail the amazing work that George Takei has managed to do. Building on the foundations of racial injustice, he has spoken about his experiences on television and in the homes of dead presidents. He co-founded the Japanese American Museum and is an activist in the LGBT+ community. George Takei entered the Arkansas internment camp, a child whose worldview should have been maliciously warped by his experiences. Instead, he took the tragedies that shaped him and did great things. His book, of course, is a testament to his activism and pursuits towards education. But still, the book has been banned. This book, of a boy's life and the seldom discussed history of his country, is deemed not fit for the eyes of the young. One can't help but infer from the governing bodies an attempt to bury their country's history, to hide their sins away like an unsightly blemish, to hide this piece of history, which can be so carelessly repeated. Would it be so wrong of the children of Tennessee to see their country in its entirety, warts and all? Alligator Alcatraz is still met with contention. At the time of writing, there's a back and forth between state officials on closing the detention center. But still, it's already built. It's a $218 million scar on the landscape. The flora and fauna will remember. What about us? When the Etsy stores have run dry and the raids have stopped or become normalized, can we really hope that one of the children there will write a tell-all book 50 years from now? Will it be censored then too? Will countries still shield their populations from the past? In a world in which history seems to be repeating itself, where distrust is sown into the political landscape, where armed forces wear masks and journalists and talk show hosts are being silenced, it's more important than ever to read banned books. Because they are dangerous. But not to you.